Have you ever wondered how far someone would go just to feel like they belong? Adolescence, that fragile and explosive stage of life, often hides monsters that don't have claws or fangs but manipulate, seduce, and rot you from the inside out. And when you're born with a silver spoon in your mouth, attending elite schools, exclusive parties, living among unquestionable privileges, you assume evil lives on the outside. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes, evil wears a designer school uniform, flashes a perfect smile, and invites you to a Ouija session just for fun. This disturbing and real story dives into the heart of Monterey, where a group of privileged teenage girls found themselves tangled in a dark ritual disguised as an innocent game. Witchcraft, possession, unspoken secrets, and a pact with a demonic entity known as the Lord of Arrogance. It all started with what seemed like friendship and ended in vengeance, mental breakdowns, and symbolic or maybe not so symbolic deaths. The scars are still there. Some are physical. Others, buried much deeper. This isn't just a story of psychological horror. It's a warning. A cruel reflection of how the hunger to be accepted can turn into a spiritual offering. It's about how trauma, nightmares, and the silent complicity of the elite can corrode even the most pristine-looking lives. But above all, this story is about Lucia, the friend everyone envied until they realized, far too late, that she wasn't looking for friends. She was collecting sacrifices. Think your world is safe because you're surrounded by status and comfort? This story will shatter that illusion. Get ready to revisit your teenage years with sharper eyes, because sometimes, the real danger isn't what's lurking in the dark. It's the one smiling right beside you. Monterey, with its towering walls and schools that look more like castles than classrooms, was the perfect stage for the kind of friendships people fantasize about but rarely understand. There they were, 5 brilliant, wealthy teenage girls, flawless on the outside. Between mansion parties and summer trips to Europe, what they were really looking for was something much simpler: a place to belong. And despite all their privileges, it was ironic that the one thing that hurt the most was loneliness. Life at the top has a price. Appearances matter more than truth. These girls weren't villains, nor were they complete victims. They were just teenagers trying to survive the crushing pressure to be perfect. Mariana, the sweet daughter of a politician, always quiet, always composed. Rebecca, the rebel, who hid the cuts on her arms beneath luxury bracelets. Valeria smiled constantly, but her eyes were always red from crying or exhaustion. No one really knew. Anna, the obsessive overachiever, terrified of disappointing her parents. And then there was Lucia. Oh, Lucia. The star. The queen bee. Built for leadership or domination. Even though they were surrounded by everything money could buy, they lacked the one thing they needed most: real trust. Each carried her own secrets, her own insecurities, hidden behind perfectly curated social masks. Their conversations were loaded with gossip and quiet judgments, but also shared rides to parties, designer clothes swapped in dressing rooms, and TikTok dances filmed on marble floors. And somewhere between the laughter and the filters, something darker started to form: not a bond of affection, but of mutual dependency. A sisterhood built on shifting sand. And that precise mix of privilege and existential emptiness made it all so easy. When Lucia suggested doing something different to shake up their routine, no one had the nerve to say no. Not because they thought it was right, but because, at that age, the fear of being excluded can be stronger than the fear of the supernatural. In that moment, they didn't know it yet, but they had just signed a pact they'd never be able to undo. Lucia had that rare kind of presence, the kind that pulls everyone into her orbit without them even noticing. Charismatic, sharp, and always 2 steps ahead, she had a gift: she knew exactly what people needed to hear, and delivered it with surgical precision. Behind her dazzling smile was a gaze that studied everything, almost clinical, always calculating. She saw people's weaknesses the way one sees cracks in fine porcelain. And when she smiled at you, it was impossible not to want her approval. Daughter of a powerful businessman and a former beauty queen, Lucia grew up with the world at her feet, but inside, she never felt enough. She held on to a quiet resentment from never truly being heard at home, only admired. And in that silence, she learned how to manipulate. For her, friendship was transactional. Every secret shared was a bargaining chip. Every tear someone else cried, a tool. Among the group, Lucia was the gravitational center. She knew everyone's secrets, but no one knew anything about her. Her manipulation came wrapped in sweet advice, perfectly timed hugs, and those soulful stares that whispered, "I understand you." But inside, Lucia wasn't looking to understand anyone, she was hungry for control. Over time, she stopped wanting friendship altogether. What she really wanted was power. And the girls? They were her emotional experiment. What made Lucia so dangerous was that she never had to raise her voice. All she needed was a suggestion. A simple, "What if we tried something different?" was enough to make anxious hearts skip a beat. Like any skilled manipulator, she didn't push, she seduced. And gradually, each girl began to believe they needed her. What no one realized was that Lucia didn't want to be part of the group. She wanted to own it. And she was about to prove that with a ritual that was anything but innocent. It started as an innocent idea after a lazy Saturday filled with popcorn and horror movies. Lucia, with that calculated glimmer in her eyes, dropped the suggestion like it was just a cute dare. What if we did something real? A real ritual. A Ouija night, just us. The girls laughed, hesitated, but deep down they were curious. Fear wasn't stronger than boredom. And Lucia knew that. The abandoned cottage on the outskirts of Monterey looked like a movie set, strange graffiti on the walls, shattered windows, and a chill in the air that didn't match the hot weather outside. Lucia had planned everything. She brought the Ouija board, black candles, some odd trinkets she claimed were her grandmother's, and most disturbing, tiny vials of blood. She said it was just symbolic, to make it feel more authentic. No one questioned her. They were trapped between nervous laughter and the desperate need to prove they were brave. In the center of a candlelit circle, holding hands, they recited words Lucia had written in an old notebook with twisted letters. It was an improvised ritual, sure, but there was something dark in the way she led each step. What was supposed to be about bonding felt heavier. When the planchette moved on its own for the first time, no one made a sound. Something had been awakened that night, or maybe something had been fed. They left the cottage with their hearts racing, laughing loudly like people do when they want to pretend they're not afraid. But none of them forgot the way Lucia's eyes looked during the ritual, dark, distant, almost hollow. And though no one dared to say it out loud, something in that place had shifted. It felt like they hadn't just left something behind but brought something back with them. From that moment on, the Ouija game was no longer a game. It was the beginning of a descent none of them could stop. Valeria was the first to bring it up. "Guys, are you having nightmares too?" At first, they seemed like normal bad dreams expected after playing with a Ouija board and watching horror movies. But the details all matched: a horned shadow, whispers in strange languages, a presence lurking in the corner of the room. No one wanted to make a big deal out of it until the nightmares started leaving real marks. Scratches, bruises, and that sulfuric smell in the air, impossible to explain. Then came the animals. Anna's cat was found dead in the garden, its eyes removed. Mariana's dog, once gentle and loving, suddenly turned aggressive and bit her out of nowhere. Even birds seemed to avoid Rebecca's house like they sensed something off. That's when one of them whispered, pale and trembling, "Lucia said animals are the first to notice." No one dared confront her directly, but the fear was already in full bloom. Subtle, growing, and impossible to ignore. The girl's behavior started to shift. Mariana, once devoutly religious, began sketching strange symbols in her notebooks. Rebecca, already emotionally unstable, had a full-blown panic attack in the school bathroom, screaming that someone was inside her head. Anna stopped sleeping altogether, showing up with sunken eyes and a haunted stare. And Valeria just cried. She didn't know why. The giggles and selfies had disappeared, replaced by long silences and distant eyes. And Lucia? She was calm, almost disturbingly so. She watched everything unfold with the serenity of someone who already knew how this would go. When asked, she'd simply say it was normal, that the ritual had opened their perception to the spiritual world. But what none of them knew yet was that it hadn't been an opening. It was an invasion. And whatever had come through that door wasn't going to leave quietly. From that point on, it was as if a quiet plague had taken root in each of their lives. Anna was the first to fall apart completely. Her father, once her emotional anchor, took his own life without leaving a note. Just a photo of Anna as a child, and the words, "Forgive your father." It shattered her. She stopped eating, stopped going to class, and began whispering to someone only she could see. A shell of who she used to be. Mariana spiraled into a toxic relationship with an older, abusive man. Within weeks, she was pregnant, unthinkable for someone raised under the rigid rules of Monterrey's conservative elite. Her parents, consumed by shame, sent her to a spiritual retreat in another state. She vanished from their social circle like she never existed. The last anyone heard, she was institutionalized for emotional instability. Valeria, once full of light, went dim. She started using drugs just to relax, but soon couldn't go a day without them. Her parents found her passed out at their beach house, wrists cut, and a message scribbled on the mirror, "He's watching me." Rebecca, meanwhile, developed a crippling phobia of mirrors, said she saw someone behind her reflection, whispering things, threatening and seductive at the same time. They were all unraveling, and fast. The most terrifying part? None of them connected their collapse to the ritual, at least not consciously. But the psychological and physical deterioration was undeniable. These once glowing girls now wandered the school like ghosts, their eyes silently screaming for help. Their lives, once pristine and curated, were now crumbling. And at the center of it all was Lucia, steady, untouched, and almost satisfied. As the others crumbled, Lucia seemed to bloom. With each tragedy, she became more radiant, more articulate, more commanding. She started standing out at social events, won school awards, and got invited into even more elite Monterrey circles. Her eyes sparkled with an almost hypnotic glow, and her charm became intoxicating. It was as if she was being nourished by their suffering, and in some way she was. Lucia didn't offer support. She offered poisoned advice. When Valeria confided in her about the nightmares, Lucia just said, "Maybe you're resisting what you need to accept." With Mariana, it was worse. Compromising photos were accidentally leaked. Rebecca blamed her for everything, but still couldn't break away. And Anna, grieving and lost, opened up to Lucia like never before, unaware that every confession was being stored, measured, and used like ingredients in a spell. Those secrets were her weapons. Lucia manipulated them with elegance, turning one girl against the other without lifting a finger. She told Mariana that Valeria had betrayed her. Told Rebecca that Anna had always envied her. All whispered. All wrapped in fake smiles. The group, already fractured, became a quiet battlefield. And Lucia, untouchable, stood at the center, stronger than ever. As if she were being rewarded. She started wearing darker clothes, discreet occult symbols around her neck, and talked about transcendence with an air of superiority. She claimed she had learned how to channel energies but never said from where. Teachers admired her, classmates feared her, adults praised her for her unusual maturity. But what no one saw was that behind this meteoric rise, there was a sealed pact. And the price for it was being paid with the souls of her friends. It took a while for the narrator to connect the dots, and when she did, it hit like a punch to the gut. Already fragile from nightmares and emotional collapse, she began to replay every detail of the ritual in her mind. The words, the symbols, the unsettling way Lucia had orchestrated it all. That night wasn't about friendship. It never was. The game wasn't an invitation, it was a sacrifice. And they all of them had been offered as spiritual fuel to a demonic entity, the Lord of Arrogance. That name, so bizarre and specific, came to her in one of the most vivid dreams. The entity appeared as a regal figure, with hollow eyes and an overwhelming presence, surrounded by the echoes of children screaming in terror. He whispered that he was pleased. That Lucia had delivered what she promised. Waking up was always a relief, but short-lived. The feeling that he was still nearby never really left. The air around her felt heavier, like reality had been poisoned. Over time, the narrator realized that Lucia hadn't just known what she was doing, she had planned every step. Every candle lit, every drop of blood spilled, every chant was part of a carefully crafted spiritual offering. And they, her friends, had never been the guests. They were the offering. Friendship was the perfect disguise. The bond Lucia wanted was not with people but with something older, darker, and far more powerful. The sense of betrayal was paralyzing. How do you trust someone who smiled at you while handing you over to darkness? But the worst part wasn't losing the friendship. It was the deep, sickening feeling that something had been taken from inside her. As if part of her soul had been carved out during the ritual. And the more the others faded emotionally, the clearer it became Lucia wasn't just a privileged girl. She was a servant of something ancient, and she was thriving on the destruction she caused. When the narrator began talking to herself, her mother thought it was just stress. But when she started writing phrases in Latin, a language she had never studied, her parents panicked. They went from doctors to therapists to spiritual healers. No one could explain what was happening. Until a former religion teacher made a radical suggestion: an exorcism. Not the Hollywood kind, but a discreet purification ritual, hidden from the school and neighbors, to free the girl from the evil surrounding her. The exorcism was led by a quiet group that blended Catholic prayers with indigenous spiritual practices. Every chant seemed to poke at something inside her, something that didn't want to leave. She screamed, cried, said things she couldn't remember later. At the end, she collapsed and slept for hours. When she finally woke up, she felt lighter but also emptier. The weight of the possession had lifted, but part of her identity had gone with it. She returned home, but she wasn't the same. Now completely dependent on her parents for everything from daily routines to basic emotional stability. Loud sounds made her jump. Her nights were still haunted by echoes of what she'd experienced. She developed panic attacks, avoided mirrors, and couldn't even hear Lucia's name without shaking. The entity might have been cast out, but the psychological trauma kept pulsing like an open wound. It was like living in a body that had been invaded. And Lucia? She vanished. Some said her family had moved to Europe. Others claimed she'd been institutionalized. But no one really knew. The group officially fell apart as if that chapter had never existed. But for those who lived it, forgetting was impossible. The narrator knew one thing for sure: the Lord of Arrogance may have left her, but he was still out there, smiling through the face of someone she once called a friend. Have you ever stopped to think about who the people around you really are? How many times have you given up a piece of yourself just to be accepted, just to avoid seeming weird, weak, or different? Adolescence is a minefield of insecurities, and too often, we fall into traps disguised as friendship. Evil doesn't always show up with horns and black eyes. Sometimes, it smells like expensive perfume, smiles like an angel, and speaks in words that sound like love. And that's when it's most dangerous. What's truly terrifying about this story isn't the demonic entity. It's how far people will go or let themselves fall in their hunger for control, belonging, and validation. How many Lucias have you met in your life? People who seem harmless, even charming, but who feed off the pain of others? People who turn trust into weapons, secrets into leverage, and intimacy into emotional captivity? Maybe you've never played with a Ouija board or spilled blood in a ritual. But what about the silent pacts you make every day? The ones where you settle for crumbs of affection just to avoid being alone? Or those moments when your gut screams something's wrong, but you ignore it just to keep the peace? This story is a warning, because deep down, we've all stood in a circle like that before. Some make it out. Others never come back the same. Psychological trauma doesn't only come from grand, dramatic events. It builds slowly from tiny emotional betrayals, moments of neglect, manipulation wrapped in kindness. And if left untreated, it grows into something darker: mental breakdowns, sleepless nights, toxic relationships, and choices that don't even feel like yours anymore. That's the true evil, the kind the Lord of Arrogance feeds on. Our silence. Our denial. Our fake strength. Our obsession with looking okay while falling apart inside. So now, I invite you to look at your own life with new eyes. Who are you feeding with your silence? What part of yourself did you hand over in a ritual you didn't even realize you joined? Maybe it's time to take back what was stolen. To break the chains that have kept you small. To face the secrets you pretend don't exist, because sometimes, the price of arrogance is your soul. If this story hit you in any way, if it reminded you of someone, or something, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, we dive deep into the shadows, not to glorify them, but to bring them into the light. Because the first step in protecting yourself from evil is recognizing that it's real. And sometimes it wears the face of someone you trusted the most.